For like the last 30 years or so, we've operated under this massive collective illusion about the internet.
Oh, totally. We just treat it like magic.
Right. We've treated it like this magical, borderless open sea. I mean, think
Right.
about it. You send an email in Paris, it routes through a server in Virginia, maybe bounces off a data center in Iceland, and you never give it a second thought. To us, it's all just the cloud.
Yeah, it's invisible. But suddenly, over the last few years, geography is back.
With an absolute vengeance.
Yeah.
Huge, invisible digital walls are basically being built all around us, which is why an article published today in Tech Reader magazine immediately caught our attention.
It really fundamentally reframes how we should be looking at the global tech landscape. I mean, we are actively moving from a global digital commons into an era of digital fortresses. The realization has finally set in across the world that the intelligence layer, the future artificial intelligence, actually has a physical address. It has a jurisdiction and immense strategic value.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in that Tech Reader feature, which was published today, June 20th, 2026, and it's titled Inside Mistral, the Paris AI Lab Taking on Silicon Valley. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a story that honestly reads less like a traditional business profile and more like a high-stakes heist movie.
It really does. It's wild.
We're going to look at how 3 researchers walked out of America's most elite, well-funded big tech labs back in 2023, flew home to Paris, and built an 11.7 billion euro AI fortress of their own in just 3 years.
Yeah.
We're going to figure out how they weaponized open source tech, why the French government threw its entire weight behind them, and what this single company means for the future of, the tools you use every single day.
It's a phenomenal case study because it forces us to look past the software and examine the physical and political realities of AI. It weaves together open source philosophy, national sovereignty, and just the sheer staggering cost of trying to compete at the bleeding edge of human computation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can fully grasp how Mistral exploded onto the scene, we really have to examine the environment these founders were escaping from.
Right, you need that context.
Yeah. To understand their motivation, the article traces ground zero of a massive philosophical shift in the AI industry back to a very specific Google research paper from 2017.
Yes. The paper is called Attention is All You Need. And if you follow artificial intelligence, even casually, you have likely heard this title. It was published in June 2017 by an 8-author team at Google, and it introduced something called the transformer architecture.
Let's break that down for a second because transformer gets thrown around as a buzzword constantly. How did this actually change the game?
So prior to the transformer, neural networks processed language sequentially. They read a sentence word by word from left to right.
Much like a human does.
Exactly. But this was incredibly slow, and the AI would often forget the context of the beginning of a paragraph by the time it finally reached the end.
Right.
Yeah. But the transformer introduced an attention mechanism. It basically allowed the AI to look at every single word in a sentence simultaneously and weigh how important each word is to all the others, regardless of their order.
Wow.
Yeah, suddenly AI could grasp context, nuance, and syntax at an unprecedented scale and speed. The transformer is essentially the DNA of almost all modern large language models. GPT, Llama, Gemini, Claude, and Mistral, they literally all share this common ancestor.
But the irony the article points out is that while this specific technology was taking off and becoming ubiquitous, the culture surrounding it was suddenly closing its doors. Like Silicon Valley was pulling up the drawbridge.
That's a great way to put it.
And OpenAI is cited as the prime example of this pivot. They launched in 2015 as a nonprofit, right? And their entire stated ethos is about open weight sharing. The whole idea was to keep research available to everyone to prevent a monopoly. But then, jump to November 2022, they release ChatGPT. It becomes a massive global phenomenon. They secure billions in Microsoft investment, and the playbook just entirely flips. The frontier models become locked inside proprietary black boxes hidden behind paid APIs.
Yeah, the justifications for pulling up that drawbridge definitely varied. Many argued it was literally the only way to fund the massive computing power required, while others pointed to safety, arguing that distributing incredibly powerful, highly capable AI freely on the internet was fundamentally dangerous.
Right.
But regardless of the rationale, the outcome was undeniable. The ecosystem was consolidating at a terrifying pace. The frontier models dictating the future were entirely American, heavily capitalized, increasingly locked away from public scrutiny.
And this brings us to the 3 individuals at the center of our source material. Arthur Mensch, Guillaume Lample, and Timothy Lacroix. They actually met at École Polytechnique, which is this elite French engineering school. And by early 2023, they had completely made it. They were inside the Silicon Valley fortress.
Oh, absolutely, at the highest levels.
Arthur is at Google DeepMind working on a massive project called the Chinchilla Paper. Guillaume and Timothy are at Meta's FAIR Lab, serving as core contributors to LaME, which, at the time, was the absolute gold standard for open-weight models.
I want to pause on the Chinchilla paper for a second because it's vital to understanding Mistral's eventual technical advantage. Before Chinchilla, the prevailing logic in Silicon Valley was simply, bigger is better.
Just throw more at it.
Right. The belief was that to make a smarter AI, you just had to pump it full of more parameters, making the artificial brain larger. What Arthur Mensch and his colleagues proved with Chinchilla was that the industry was drastically undertraining its models.
Wait, undertraining?
Yeah. They proved mathematically that if you take a smaller model, but train it for a much longer time on vastly superior, highly curated data, it will actually outsmart a model twice its size that was trained on, lower quality data.
So it's like a smaller, highly disciplined brain reading encyclopedias meets a massive brain just scrolling through internet garbage.
In crude terms, yes. It was a total revelation about compute-optimal training. And this understanding of how to squeeze maximum performance out of smaller architectures became the absolute bedrock of what these three would eventually build.
Okay, I understand they were brilliant, but I really have to push back on their career logic here. You are sitting at the absolute center of the technological universe. You have access to the safest, most lavishly funded labs in human history, exactly at the moment those labs are undeniably winning the global AI race.
Yeah.
Why in the world do you walk away from that?
What's fascinating here is that for these specific researchers, the consolidation of power in Silicon Valley wasn't a comfort. It was a blaring warning siren. They were watching the ecosystem close from the inside.
Oh, I see.
For them, that was the exact signal that an independent European alternative wasn't just a romantic idea. It was an absolute geopolitical necessity. If Silicon Valley was going to lock the gates and control the intelligence layer of the internet, Europe needed its own key. So by early 2023, they all independently reached the same conclusion. The timing was perfect, and Paris was the place to do it.
So they actually do it. They resign, pack their bags, and in April 2023, they incorporate Mistral AI in Paris. They pool together 8.5 million euros of their own money. And the name itself, Mistral. I absolutely love this detail from the feature.
It's a great story.
It's not just a slick tech moniker cooked up in a boardroom somewhere. The Mistral is a literal meteorological phenomenon. It is a notoriously strong, cold, relentless wind that blows through the Rhone Valley in the south of France. It's a very deliberate signal to the American labs. They see themselves as a natural, disruptive, undeniable force sweeping through the industry.
And disruptive barely covers what happens next, honestly, because their initial fundraising round breaks essentially every conventional rule of venture capital.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Within weeks of filing their incorporation papers, they close a 105 million euro seed round. A seed round.
It's unheard of.
That is the largest seed investment in European AI history. You have heavyweights like Lightspeed, Redpoint, Eric Schmidt, and French telecom billionaire Xavier Niel just rushing to write massive checks. But I need to paint the reality of this situation for you. At the time they cashed those checks, they had exactly 3 employees.
Just the founders.
They had 0 products, no code repository, no beta software, just a pitch deck and a pedigree.
It perfectly illustrates the absolute premium that the market was placing on world-class AI talent at that specific moment in time. Investors knew they weren't buying a finished software product. They were buying the minds that had already built the foundational architectures at Meta and DeepMind.
Right.
They were betting that those 3 brains, armed with the insights from projects like Chinchilla and Llama, could build a more efficient model completely from scratch.
Hold on, I need to parse the business logic here, because this is where their strategy seems to completely defy gravity. You just raised 105 million euros. The pressure from your investors has to be astronomical. So in September 2023, they released their very first major model, Mistral 7B. It's a 7 billion parameter model, and true to their Chinchilla insights, it absolutely crushes it. Independent evaluators confirm it is outperforming American models that are twice its size.
Incredible performance.
But they released Mistral 7B under an Apache 2.0 open source license, meaning absolutely anyone on Earth can download the actual weights of the model, modify it, and use it entirely for free.
Yeah.
If you just raised a historic amount of venture capital, how on earth is giving your first major breakthrough away for free a sustainable business model? How does Goodwill buy server time?
It sounds deeply counterintuitive when you look at it through a traditional software sales lens. But it was a stroke of strategic brilliance. You really have to remember the asymmetric warfare they were engaging in.
What do you mean?
Well, they were a startup going up against giants like Microsoft and Google, who have virtually unlimited resources and massive existing distribution channels. If Mistral tried to compete by locking their first untested model behind a paywall on day one, the market would have completely ignored them.
Because nobody knows who they are yet.
Exactly. By releasing it under an open source license, they effectively weaponized openness.
So they bypassed the traditional sales cycle entirely and went straight to the engineers.
Precisely. They instantly won over the global open source developer community, which was completely starved for high-quality models that weren't locked behind a corporate API. Thousands of developers downloaded Mistral 7B, stress-tested it, integrated it into their own apps, and definitively proved to the market that Mistral's performance claims were real.
They got free marketing.
Yes, the developers became a massive, decentralized marketing and validation engine. It forced the entire industry to take them seriously overnight. It wasn't about generating immediate subscription revenue. It was about establishing undeniable global relevance.
And once they had the attention, the product evolution was blistering. I mean, they didn't just sit on 7B. They followed up with Mistral, which introduced this concept called a mixture of experts architecture.
That's a vital technical leap. Instead of activating the entire massive neural network for every single prompt, which, costs a fortune in compute power, a mixture of experts model acts more like a triage nurse.
Okay.
It looks at your prompt and routes it only to the specific subnetwork or expert best suited to answer it. A coding question goes to the math and logic expert. A translation request goes to the linguistics expert.
So it's not using the whole brain at once.
Right. It allows the model to have a massive total capacity but run incredibly fast and cheap because it only uses a fraction of its brain at any given moment.
That's a great way to look at it, like walking into a specialized hospital instead of asking one general practitioner to do literally everything. And from there, they just blanketed the market. They launched Mistral Large for heavy enterprise reasoning, CodeStraw specifically for programmers, and eventually Le Chat, their direct consumer-facing competitor to ChatGPT. They build a full spectrum portfolio in the time it takes most startups to figure out their branding.
That's true. But
here is where the article forces us to shift our perspective. All of this explosive technical growth didn't just happen in a vacuum. Mistral's hyper-efficient open-weight strategy caught the attention of the global developer community, sure. But more importantly, it caught the eye of the French government.
Yeah, this is the pivot where Mistral transforms from an exciting tech startup into a literal instrument of national sovereignty. The article highlights a massive state initiative called France 2030, which was actually launched back in 2021.
So way before Mistral.
Long before Mistral even existed, the French state was deliberately restructuring its economy to fund AI research infrastructure, pouring massive capital into advanced mathematics and computer science programs, specifically to stop their brightest minds from continually draining out to California.
Wow, they were planning ahead.
The soil was meticulously prepared for a company exactly like Mistral to take root.
And the political engagement wasn't subtle. We aren't talking about quiet grants here. By December 2023, President Emmanuel Macron is on the record publicly praising the founders, calling them a shining example of French genius.
And he significantly escalated that support, too. During the Paris AI Action Summit in February 2025, which was a monumental event that announced 109 billion euros in domestic AI investments, President Macron went on national television and explicitly instructed French citizens to download Mistral's Le Chat instead of ChatGPT.
Think about that for a second. The leader of a G7 nation going on television to act as a pitchman for a consumer app. That is just wild, but it worked.
It really did.
Within 2 weeks of that broadcast, Le Chat hit 1 million downloads and claimed the #1 spot on the iOS App Store in France.
From a geopolitical standpoint, it is a striking example of a state actively leveraging a private domestic company to aggressively further a national agenda. And this partnership culminated in January 2026 when Mistral secured a massive, highly classified contract with the French Ministry of Armed Forces.
Unbelievable.
Mistral's models are now being deeply integrated into the military for cyber defense, network intrusion detection, and real-time translation of sensitive geopolitical documents.
But there is a massive non-negotiable condition attached to the military contract. The data being processed can never, under any circumstances, leave French territory. It has to be processed on domestic hardware.
Yes.
And this makes perfect sense when you step back. Think about it like a nation's power grid or steel industry. In the 20th century, you couldn't call yourself a truly sovereign nation unless you could produce your own steel or control your own electricity.
Right, because of dependency.
Exactly. If a foreign power can flip a switch and turn off your lights, you aren't independent. Today, AI is the new national airspace. If you are relying on a foreign country's servers in California to process your military logistics, your citizen data, or your cyber defense, you are effectively handing the keys to your airspace to a foreign entity.
That is the exact framing driving this policy. Macron and other European leaders frequently describe this approach as the third way. You have the American AI model, which is largely driven by massive consolidated private tech corporations. Then you have the Chinese model, which is characterized by total state integration and surveillance.
So what's the third way?
The third way is positioned as a distinct alternative, neither purely corporate nor purely state-run, but built on European values of privacy, open-source principles, and critically sovereign physical infrastructure. And we saw this exact philosophy actively shape the European Union's AI Act in August 2024.
Huh.
The French government successfully lobbied the EU to ensure lighter regulatory compliance burdens specifically for open-weight models, directly carving out a massive competitive advantage for domestic champions like Mistral.
Which finally brings us to the most complex and honestly the most contradictory part of the source material. By 2026, Mistral seems to have successfully executed this third way. They have the mind-blowing 11.7 billion euro valuation. They have the sovereign military contracts. They have the patriotic backing of their government. But there is a massive glaring catch buried in their balance sheet.
Yes, the inescapable, brutal realities of physics and computation.
Let's trace their funding arc over the last 3 years. They have their initial Series A in late 2023. Then, to keep up with OpenAI and Google, they raise a massive 600 million euro Series B in June 2024 and was led by Andreessen Horowitz.
A huge American firm.
Right. Then, a Series C in September 2025, led by the Dutch chip manufacturing giant ASML, which officially pushed their valuation to that 11.7 billion euro mark. And why do they need all that cash? Because software isn't magic, it runs on metal.
It sure does.
To physically process their AI, they had to build Mistral Compute. This is a proprietary cloud layer running on 18,000 top-of-the-line NVIDIA Grace Blackwell superchips, housed in a sprawling 40-megawatt data center just south of Paris in Assan. So what does this all mean?
It's the big question.
When you peel back the layers and look at Mistral's cap table, the actual list of entities that own a piece of this independent French champion, you're looking at Microsoft, NVIDIA, IBM, Salesforce, ASML, and Andreessen Horowitz.
It is the ultimate independence paradox. You have the very Silicon Valley titans that Mistral was explicitly founded to challenge, now sitting as major stakeholders in the company. In fact, Microsoft's early investment in Mistral drew intense scrutiny from the European Commission precisely over concerns of market concentration, the fear that big tech was just buying up the only viable European alternative.
This is exactly what I struggle to reconcile. How can Mistral authentically claim to be the sovereign, independent alternative to Silicon Valley consolidation when their cap table is a literal who's who of Silicon Valley giants? You are selling national independence, but you are literally paying rent to the landlords you are supposedly fighting.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights the most profound open question the article leaves us with, the question of sheer durability.
Okay.
Training and running frontier AI models is becoming exponentially more expensive every single quarter. We are talking about billions of dollars purely for the electricity and physical compute power.
Just to keep the lights on.
Yeah. Can any single lab, no matter how brilliant their algorithms are or how compute optimal their training is, actually pace the global frontier independently? Mistral fundamentally needed that massive injection of American capital to build out a 40-megawatt data center. They absolutely required those American-designed NVIDIA chips to train their models.
That makes sense.
Achieving independence in your software code is one thing. Achieving independence in the physical, multi-billion-dollar supply chain of hardware is something entirely different.
It really forces you to view their entire mission with this mixture of awe and, well, heavy realism. It is a breathtaking achievement. They took 3 years to go from 3 researchers sitting in a room with a radical idea to an 11.7 billion euro sovereign AI powerhouse powering a nation's military.
It's unprecedented.
But the finish line keeps moving. The computational entry fee just to stay in the race keeps doubling every year.
And that reality is precisely why this story is so critical for anyone paying attention to the trajectory of modern technology. The AI tools you use for work, the predictive text on your phone, the chat windows you type sensitive corporate data into these are no longer just benign software products. They are structural pillars of a new global economy.
Right. They're literal geopolitical assets.
Yeah.
AI has become the infrastructure of the 21st century.
Exactly. And this raises an important question. Something we really need to think about is this technology scales, which stretches far beyond just Mistral or France.
What's that?
If this model of sovereign compute, where a nation legally mandates that its domestic data never leaves its physical borders and relies entirely on closed, localized hardware, if that becomes the new global standard for national security, does the World Wide Web as we know it eventually fracture?
Oh, wow.
Are we looking at a future where the internet ceases to be a globally connected network, and instead every single nation retreats into its own walled garden AI intranet? A digital world entirely defined by physical borders.
Wow. That fundamentally unwinds what the internet has represented for our entire lifetimes. We started this deep dive talking about the massive, invisible digital drawbridges going up around the world. And it seems like Mistral didn't just build a wildly successful software company. They proved to the world that a country can successfully build a moat.
They certainly did.
Whether that moat ultimately protects us or simply isolates us from a shared global future is something we are all going to have to watch very, very closely in the years ahead. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the tech you use every day, and we'll see you next time.